state calls Angela Phillips. Ma'am, if you could please stand up and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, you can have a seat and scoot your chair on up to that microphone. You have a pretty soft voice. I need this man back here to be able to hear you, okay? If you could please introduce yourself to the jury.
I am Angela Phillips. I work at Burn Foreman. I was Mr. Farris's assistant for almost 28 years.
Thank you, ma'am. Can you tell the jury a little bit about where you started at Burn Foreman and your move to Georgia?
I started as a temp right after my husband got a job in Birmingham after we got out of the Navy. They hired me the first week. I started working for Mr. Farris and another attorney at that time. We were there for 5 years. I always wanted to live in Atlanta. My brother and sister-in-law were here, but my ex-husband took the job in Birmingham basically without even asking where I wanted to be. So when the job came open in Atlanta, we discussed moving. He wasn't interested. We were in marriage counseling at the time, and later we went through a divorce, and then I asked to be transferred to Atlanta when we were going through, not custody, but visitation. I was going to stay in the house. He was supposed to see our daughter, every other weekend on Wednesdays, and then he started, oh, I can't get her tonight, oh, maybe, so he wasn't going to keep any kind of schedule. So I then asked for the transfer to Atlanta where he would have to adhere to a schedule.
Okay, so what year was that when you asked for the transfer to Atlanta?
95.
Okay. And did you end up transferring to the Atlanta office?
I did.
And you were still with Burn Foreman?
Yes.
Okay, and who were your attorneys? Was it attorney or attorneys that you were assigned to?
I was so originally it was Gary and Ginger Busby. Then I transferred from Ginger to Darren Collier, and so I was working for Darren and Gary even once he transferred to Atlanta. And then I had a new associate also, whose name I don't recall.
And so you tend to work for multiple attorneys at one time?
Yes, I currently have 5.
Currently you have 5? So when you transferred here from Atlanta, how long had you known Gary?
5 years.
5 years. Did you work with him the whole 5 years prior to coming to Atlanta?
I did.
When you came to Georgia, apart from your brother-in-law, let me ask you this, where did you move to in Georgia when you came to Atlanta?
So Darren Collier, who I worked for in Atlanta, his mother lived in Marietta. She actually showed me around, helped me find an apartment, and eventually we found one in Alpharetta.
Tell me about your early professional relationship with Gary. How well did you know each other?
I mean, we talked about the kids and what we did on the weekend. He'd tell me about his honey-do list, ball, whatever the kids were doing, family stuff.
And at that time, did you know much about Melody Farris, Gary's wife?
Not really, not a lot. I think I'd met her once or saw her in the office when she brought the baby and the toddler.
So that would have been Chris and Scott, or the girls?
The little girls.
The girls. And I want to get into a little bit about how your relationship with Gary evolved over time. Can you tell the jury, when you moved to Georgia, did your relationship with Gary ever cross from professional to personal?
Unfortunately, it did.
Okay, can you tell the jury briefly about when that was?
It was probably in 95. It wasn't ongoing. I wouldn't classify it as an affair. We just became very close, especially once I moved here. I didn't know anybody else other than my brother and his wife, and they lived in Hiram at the time. and I was in Alpharetta, so that was over an hour drive.
You lived in Alpharetta?
I lived in Alpharetta, and I did make one friend that was actually the assistant of one of our clients in the same building where we worked in Midtown, and then she lived in Alpharetta nearby. So, and she had 2 little girls, just a little older than my daughter.
And when you say that your relationship with Gary went from professional to personal, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, he became more of a confidant and a friend and an encourager on the weekends where I would have to take my daughter to meet her dad were very difficult for me. And so he was a shoulder that I leaned on. And then unfortunately there were a couple of instances where, you know, long hours, sometimes alcohol involved, things crossed a line.
And it became physical?
Yes.
How long would you say that the physical relationship lasted?
Well, it wasn't an ongoing thing. It wasn't like planned. A few occurrences maybe over the course of a year and a half, maybe.
Did it extend beyond the 90s?
Oh, definitely not.
How did it stop? And why did it stop?
Well, it stopped because I became friends with Melody and the girls. And I was such a mess back then, you know, and not having friends. But then I got involved in a church, and, you know, the person that I was up until that point, age 30, was so different than the person I was at 30, 31, 32. I was going through that. And then I was just able to find my way back to the person that I was, to the, you know, with the morals and and my relationship with God. And just, you know, I would never want anybody to cheat on me, you know, with my ex-husband. So then when I realized, you know, it's like I was able to separate him from her when I didn't know her.
So at some point, did your relationship with Gary just go back to being professional?
Yes, I mean, we were still friends, but we were able to work through, and we had an excellent working relationship. We were a team, and I still miss that, you know.
How many years total did you work for Gary?
It would have been 28 in October if he had lived that year in 2018. I just celebrated my 34th anniversary with the firm last week.
Okay, so 28 years.
Yes.
Just short of 28 years with
Yes.
Gary. Okay. So over those 28 years, you saw Gary almost every single day in the office.
Yes.
Did Gary share with you information regarding his relationships with his family?
Yes.
And did you have access to Gary's financial situation?
Yes.
To
some degree.
Okay, can you explain what?
Well,
to what degree?
I mean, you know, I filed his taxes, made copies, and, you know, we used to do TurboTax in the office. We would all share the same disk, and so I would photocopy, and then, you know, he would share some things.
And in the beginning, would Melody come by the office and see Gary?
Sometimes. I spoke with her on the phone almost every day for several years after I moved.
What would you two have to speak about?
Just anything. She just talked. I mean, you know, I would hear the same stories from her and from him. Sometimes you wouldn't know it was the same story if you didn't know it was the same story, you know. She elaborated more, I guess.
Okay. So I want to move forward a little bit to let's say around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
At some point, did you see a change in Gary and Melody's relationship?
Yes, she became increasingly more critical of him in our phone conversations. And he became increasingly exasperated.
Okay. Can you speak up just a little bit
sorry,
for me?
yeah.
You still have a very soft voice.
Oh, sorry.
And I need all of these people to hear you.
Okay.
You said he became increasingly exacerbated.
Well, I mean, he just, I think that's around the time she started kind of disappearing. It's hard to remember the timeline exactly, but I do know that she was angry that he was receiving this Father of the Year award.
Okay. And I want to talk about, you mentioned her disappearing. What is it that you know about that?
I know that she would, go to her friend Sheila's, I think, or she would go to her mom's. Sometimes she would just, I can't remember the years, but I just remember he was only able to know where she was based on the credit card activity.
And at some point, did Gary start receiving his financial documents to the office?
Yes. He did after she ran all the cards up and was basically, breaking the bank. So, yeah.
Do you remember around what year that would have been when he began getting his financial information sent to the office?
Really can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say it was maybe 2016, 2017.
So in 2018, you were receiving information, his financial documents?
Yes. Mm.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Ms. Phillips, I'm showing you State's Exhibit Phillips 1. And I want you to just go right there. Is that the office address down in the middle of that page?
It was at the time.
At the time, in
Right.
2018?
Yes.
State moves into evidence, State's Exhibit Phillips 1.
Okay, exhibit.
Okay, is this the exhibit I just showed you, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. And this was the address at the time in 2018?
Correct.
Okay. And so this states that Mr. Farris had a credit card ending in 1727 mailed to the office.
Right.
Now, would you receive his mail?
Yes.
Can you tell me, well, the date on that is reversed. Is that 15/6/2018?
Yes.
Date? So it'll be June 15th, 2018? Does that sound about right when you
Right.
would have received that credit card?
Right, I remember that new card coming.
You remember that new card coming
Yeah.
in? All right. I want to talk about, jury's heard a little bit about Mr. Farris's spells.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell the jury if you've witnessed one of those spells?
Oh, many.
And what would happen to Mr. Farris when he was
Well, he would complain of dry mouth and kind of a burning in his throat, but you would know he would fall asleep at his desk. I mean, sometimes he would, be in his chair. Sometimes he would sit on the sofa, and a lot of times in the afternoon he would go in and close the door and just say, "I'm taking my 15." But a lot of times that extended beyond 5 o'clock, and I would have one of the associates or paralegals work on later check on him before they left to make sure he could drive.
Did he, do you remember in 2018 when Mr. Farris was in the hospital?
I do.
And how did you know about that?
I believe Melody called me.
Okay, what was that conversation like?
Well, just kind of matter of fact, she was talking about how he didn't take care of himself and the smoking.
Were you concerned when Gary was in the hospital?
A little bit, yeah.
Did you know why he was in the hospital?
Not really,
Were you able to speak with him when he was in the hospital?
no.
Why
It was
that?
my understanding she didn't allow him to have a cell phone.
In the hospital.
Right.
To your, in your experience with Mr. Farris, had he ever been suicidal or had suicidal ideations or expressed thoughts
No,
about that?
absolutely not.
Tell me about Mr. Farris's work ethic and routine.
So typically he would work from home in the mornings, especially after they moved out to the farm, just to avoid the traffic. And then he would come in the office around 10 and often stay beyond 6. I never worked later than 6 unless there was a special project. So, but then I know sometimes he would continue work on after hours or on the weekends, because I had the habit of checking my work email on Sunday nights just to see what to expect the next day.
Would it be unusual for Mr. Farris to go, let's say, 24 hours without answering a work email?
Oh no, absolutely not.
And you said he worked on holidays sometimes? Well, you mentioned the farm and that he would come in a little bit later when they moved to the farm.
Right.
What did you know about them moving out to the farm?
Well, I know it was not his idea. If he had had his way after the kids moved out, he would have bought a condo closer to the office and then maybe gotten a farm or a lake house further out to enjoy on weekends. But I think because she had an affair with a man that had horses, I think he...
Objection calls for speculation.
Okay.
Sustained.
When they moved out to the farm, did Gary change at all?
I don't know about change. I mean, I think he enjoyed having the horses and the farm. He liked to do manual labor. I mean, I remember, somebody that makes that much money would normally get a lawn service or have the boys do it, but, he preferred to do it himself. I know part of it was because he knew he could do it right. But I think he just enjoyed tinkering, I remember he always had projects as far back as I remember, and so I think he enjoyed having the horses and the farm, but he did not like the distance.
From the office?
Right, and he was unhappy that it still did not keep her at home.
I want to talk about the week of July 1st, 2018.
Okay.
All right. Now, that Monday, which was July 2nd, did Gary go into the office that day?
I do not recall.
Did he come into the office on July 3rd? That would be Tuesday.
He did not.
How do you know that?
Well, I just recall that we exchanged emails that day.
On the 3rd.
On the 3rd.
And at any point on the 3rd, did you notice he was no longer responding to emails?
Yes, he was no longer responding after sometime between 3 and 3:30, I think.
Is that typical or atypical for him?
It's atypical.
I want to talk about July 5th, when his remains were found, okay? How did you find out about Gary's remains being located?
So originally, Melody called looking for him. I didn't know anything, and I checked my email on the evening of the 4th, assuming he had replied to the emails from the 3rd, but he had not. And so when she was looking for him, I thought it was odd that she wouldn't know where he was, but I was concerned enough to call, because when you would call, if he was driving, you would get a message, a focus message that he was driving. If you sent a text message, it would come across his email in the office. So I just said, let me know when you find him, and then I don't remember how much later that was. Amanda called to tell me that he had been located.
Do you know what time Melody called you that morning?
It was after 11, but before noon.
After 11, before noon. Okay. And then Amanda called. And what information did you get from Amanda?
That they had found him in the burn pile.
When you received that information, what did you do next?
I mean, I just broke down. I couldn't believe it, I don't know. I just went to my friends and cried and talked about how I couldn't believe what had happened and how could it have happened.
When you spoke with Melody between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., did she tell you when she had last seen Gary?
She called me a second time, so I don't remember if this was the first call or the second, but I think it was that call, the first call, that she said that the grandkids had said, we haven't seen Big Daddy in a while. And she said she recalled seeing him on the 3rd.
Okay, and you mentioned she called a second time. When was that second call?
That was, it was early afternoon, early to mid-afternoon.
And what was that call about?
She talked about his remains being found in the burn pile, and I inquired as to how he got there. I couldn't fathom any way that he got there. She suggested maybe he had a spell and fell in, and that didn't make any sense to me. His spells were never bad enough that he would fall into a fire and not be able to pull himself out. And I asked, would there be an autopsy? To which she said, oh, there's not enough remains for an autopsy, which just made my blood turn cold, and still does.
You could just spare me 1 moment. Thank you, Miss Phillips. That's all I have.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Weaver.
Good morning, Ms. Phillips. My name is John Luke Weaver, and I represent Melody. So I want to go back in time to the year you started with Gary. What year was that?
1990.
And that was over in the Birmingham office.
Correct.
Of Burn Foreman.
That's correct.
Right. And how long had you been working there?
I started working for him the first
Immediately.
week.
You were hired on to him.
I was hired as a temp the first week, but then when they hired me full time, the second week, I was assigned to him.
Right. And you guys, y'all weren't in litigation. Y'all were. Explain that a little better.
So, probably creditors' rights, bankruptcy, corporate, and then when the market shifts, we would go to lending. So, if loans are being made, if the economy's good, then we represented the banks for loans, and then if the economy went bad, we would represent the banks against creditors who defaulted on loans.
Okay. Was that all the way through
Yes.
your career? It never shifted?
No.
Okay. And so it wasn't real estate closings, like large closings, correct? Or
That was here.
Okay.
The market has shifted by the time I moved to Atlanta, and it was almost exclusively closings.
Okay. Large real estate
Yes,
transactions.
multi-million-dollar.
Commercial transactions for
Correct.
the most part. And large housing developments too, I imagine.
Shopping centers, yeah, those sort of things.
And that's what you guys specialized in
Yes,
by the time you got here in '95.
yes.
So let's go back to in Birmingham. Were y'all close?
I mean, we were friendly. We were close-ish, I guess.
Sure. Well, so you moved. You mentioned your divorce,
Right.
and you divorced in what year?
95.
And what came first? So you mentioned that you and Gary had a relationship in the mid '90s.
Right.
But what came? Were y'all also having the relationship in Birmingham?
No.
All right. So it started when you came to Atlanta.
Yes.
But you were fond of him. Y'all were close.
Yes.
Talking about, I'm sure he consulted with you about your divorce.
Yes.
And you moved here in '95, correct?
Yes.
So let's go back. So, and I do want to remind you of this. You gave 2 statements in this case.
Right.
And the first statement, you didn't mention anything about the relationship that you had with Gary, correct?
Right.
And then you actually called them to tell them that you did.
Yes, because during the statement, I was not asked about it.
You weren't asked about it?
Nobody asked me about it. And then I was headed back to my desk, and I was pulled to the side by our managing partner,
Who was that?
Eric Durlacher,
Okay.
and the firm's attorney, and 2 investigators. I was pulled into a little room, tiny little room, nothing like this, and kind of back against a wood door, asked this question and put on the spot, and I was so shocked by the question, first of all, and I said no, because I didn't want to, I don't know,
And this is the firm, people with the firm.
right,
Okay.
Mr. Durlacher, and then people with the investigation, but I just didn't want Eric to hear it that way. I didn't want to be put on the spot like that, but then I did reach out because I didn't want it to ever be an issue of credibility. I wanted them to know that I would not lie about it under oath should it come up for any reason.
Okay. And here we are, talking
Here we
about
are.
it under oath.
Exactly.
So I do want to go back. You mentioned that you guys did have a romantic relationship.
I wouldn't call it romantic.
You stated in one of that you kissed. You kissed multiple times.
Right.
Right? And then you told, I believe, Detective Kuykendall that you can't remember whether you actually had sexual intercourse with him or not.
Right.
Was that correct? You can't remember?
I can't.
Right. And you guys would meet up and go to hotels, yes?
No, there was a hotel. There was a hotel connected to the office.
At the Hyatt or
George.
Georgian Terrace?
No, I don't remember the name of it.
Okay. But you stated that you couldn't remember if you actually had sexual intercourse with him.
No, it was not. I don't recall ever having intercourse. No.
Okay. But you kissed him, and you
Yes.
stayed in hotel rooms with him.
No, he walked me to my hotel room when I stayed over here before I moved.
You described him as a friend, a confidant, and a shoulder to lean on. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, like I said, I didn't have a lot of friends over here at the time because I was new. I felt comfortable talking to him. I mean, he would encourage me to make friends. I remember one weekend I was set to go to like a women's retreat with a church that I just started to, and I was nervous about going there, and he just encouraged me to get out and, you know, make friends and learn to be, to make a life here in Georgia.
And he would talk to you frequently about your situation, your custody situation that you were having at the time. You mentioned that earlier.
Well, I mean, we didn't talk about it often, but yeah, he knew what it was. So on the weekends when I was going to be without her, you know, I would express how sad I was going to be home alone. I remember once he's like, I always have a house full of people, you know, but I wouldn't give for one weekend alone. You know,
That's what he said?
Well, yeah, you know, just kind of, you know, I should try to enjoy.
So when y'all were talking and y'all would have these close conversations, now y'all worked in the same office.
Yes.
And did y'all ever kiss in the office?
No.
So this was just out when y'all were drinking?
Right.
All right. And when did you guys ever discuss Gary leaving Melody for you?
Oh, no.
That never came up, not one time.
No.
So y'all would just talk, y'all would just kiss and have these close conversations, but never talk about actually being together?
No, there was no interest on either end. Mm-mm.
So how did these interactions supposedly stop?
Well, like I said, it's like, you know, I became friends with her, and she became a real person to me. You know, he was isolated to me in the office situation. You know, there's one thing to know, but there's another thing to see.
Okay. But, I mean, realistically, Melody knew about the two of you.
I don't know.
Okay. And did y'all ever talk about that? Do you remember that?
Melody and I?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
But y'all were close, you and
Well,
Melody.
I mean, we would talk and we did things together sometimes with the girls.
But realistically, y'all's relationship tapered off. What year did you guys move to the Atlantic Station office?
I think we moved there in, well, we just moved to our new location last year. So we had been in Atlantic Station for 21 years at that point.
Okay, so that would have been, what, about 2002?
I guess we moved to Atlantic Station around 2000 or 2001.
Early 2000s.
Yes.
Okay. But that would be the more realistic time that you and Melody, I think you mentioned something about 2010, but your relationship really kind of stopped in the early 2000s with Melody, as far as being close, talking.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, she talked a lot. I couldn't get work done. Once caller ID became available, I just didn't answer.
You just didn't pick up the phone anymore.
No, and I mean, sometimes I would, but then she just became more increasingly critical of him. And, you know, I wasn't interested in hearing it.
So you were just kind of ready to get out of their marriage, essentially, at that point?
Well, yeah, I mean, after the inappropriate contact, I tried to back away from that. There was a time where they were having problems. I encouraged him to go for marriage counseling. And I said, you know, if she won't go with you, which he alluded to, I said, go for yourself. That's what I ended up doing. And, yeah.
You had access to, I mean, obviously his bank accounts and things like that, correct?
Well, I typically didn't open the personal things like that.
But you had access to his Gmail account, right? Gary4250@gmail.com?
Only to the extent that he would forward things to me. I
Okay.
didn't have a password.
But you saw, at his work email, you had total access to that.
Yes.
Right. And so could you ever see any of his work emails that he would, I mean, from what I understand, and tell me if I'm wrong, but Gary was one of those folks that communicated through email, yes?
Yes.
A lot of the time.
A lot.
Even his interpersonal communication with his kids, his wife, yes?
I don't know if he did with her, but
What about
yeah,
the kids?
with the
Like
kids.
Emily?
Maybe. I don't recall specifically if there was a lot.
Sure. But did you ever run across any emails with a Joanne Ward Hill?
No.
You don't remember those?
No.
Did you ever meet Joanne Ward Hill since she works in your building?
I did.
Okay. Did you know that he was attempting to have a relationship with her?
I did.
You did know that? And that they would talk? I mean, did she come to the office a lot?
No, I think they went on smoke breaks together.
Okay. Would you have considered them dating?
No.
Okay. But you knew that he wanted to pursue something with Joanne, yes?
Yes.
Okay. How did you know that?
So Joanne worked at AGG. One of our employees' sister worked at AGG and knew that she knew me. So Joanne's coworker asked my coworker, who called and asked me if Gary was still married,
Okay.
and told me why.
And what do you mean why? What do you, go ahead.
Well, that he had asked Joanne out.
All right. And here's what I'm trying to get you to explain to me. He's out there essentially trying to date Joanne Ward Hill. Therefore, it's reasonable for you to have construed it as paralegal because you are very close to him, right? Going through his credit cards, you're getting these notices, opening these notices, his emails, his life. You're part of all of it.
Right.
It was fair to say that they were in an open marriage. He's dating, she's dating.
I don't know of him dating per se. I knew that she was having an affair. He knew that she was having an affair because
Would you not say that sending emails to another woman asking for dates and taking smoke breaks is an affair?
I didn't see him ask her in an email.
Okay. How did you know he asked her?
Joanne told Lynn, who told Billy, who asked me if he was still married.
That's a lot of levels of hearsay.
It was. So, and then Joe.
Like a textbook definition of hearsay. There you go. Doesn't mean it's not true, but
But it would be reasonable to believe that because he was pursuing dating and
Understand them. They lived on different levels of the house.
different levels of the house, seeing other people, yes?
I don't know that he saw other people other than trying to ask Joanne out
Okay.
because he was sick all the time.
He was sick on it.
He was either sick or he was working.
And he would have these spells. He would have these spells while Melody was out of town, right?
No, there was about a period of a year where he did not have them when she was gone.
Okay. Now, would it shock you that his son Scott said that he would have spells when she was out of town?
Well, I'm not saying that he never had them when she was out of town. I don't know what was causing them. Maybe it was anxiety, maybe it was something else. I know that he went to the doctor to be tested, but I also know I encouraged him to get tested for poisoning. And
You encouraged him to get tested for poison.
yes.
Okay. So that's where that idea came from, was from you?
Well, he said at one point that he thought she was poisoning him, and I encouraged him to go to the doctor. And he said that was embarrassing.
When did you ever, I'll ask you, have you remarried? Have you moved on since Gary? Okay.
Well, I mean, I never remarried. I didn't want to remarry.
Right. Did you still love Gary?
As a person, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about as, wishing he'd be your romantic.
No, never.
And as far as being in the hospital and you allegedly not having cell phone communication, I mean, Gary always had his phone with him, yes?
I think so, yes.
Right, and he was always texting you and calling you,
Yeah,
emailing you,
right.
constantly.
Well, I mean, not constantly.
I mean, it's kind of absurd to think that You know, if I go to the hospital, the first two people I'm going to call is my wife and my paralegal.
Right.
Because they are the two most important people in my life. They
Right.
run my life. So you would have had communication with him because he would have had to have talked to you about, hey, we've got this case coming up. You know, we're going to have to move that closing. So that would be reasonable, yes?
Yes, but I was told he wasn't allowed to have his phone.
Who told you that?
I think Melody said she wanted him to rest, so she didn't give him his phone.
Well, then that'd be pretty reasonable, too. If he's trying to rest in a hospital, he's had a spell, maybe he doesn't need to work.
Right.
Well, but you insinuated that she somehow built this barrier between you and cut him off and hid him in the hospital away from you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I didn't have any contact with him during that time.
If I may have one moment, Your Honor.
Are you ready?
Ms. Phillips, did you know how Gary felt about Melody having affairs?
Well, yes.
And how was that?
Well, I mean, he was obviously not happy about it. Especially since there were multiples. I remember the first time, and I don't know that this turned into an affair. I just remember him leaving the office sick one time. This is at least 25 years ago, because she'd gotten an email from some man talking about her legs and her red painted toenails.
And that was a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Did Gary ever express to you his state of mind when it came to if he were to pass away?
I know that he talked about changing his beneficiary information, that he did not want her to get another penny of his money because of the way she had wasted it and kept cheating.
Did he ever express to you his, and when I say state of mind, you know, the way he felt and at the moment, at the time, as if something were to happen to him?
Well, we had a conversation about, I said, you need to go be tested for poisoning. If you don't want to go to our regular doctor, we have the same doctor, and obviously I couldn't tell the doctor to test him. I said, go to a different doctor. He went out on a smoke break, and he came back, and he said, well, you'll know what to tell Dateline if I die mysteriously.
And that was
That Melody
kind of
had,
in jest in a way.
yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Weaver.
For a moment, please, Judge. Do you remember that Gary would keep, actually, and whether for medical purposes or for his own personal purposes, because he's a very organized person, right?
Yes.
That he would actually keep a log of his spells. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And would he turn that over to his doctors?
No.
Would he actually go to the doctor?
He did.
Okay, what was the theory on what was causing these spells from the actual doctor?
They couldn't find anything.
They check his blood sugar?
They checked everything.
All right. Did he mention to him, let me slow down. Did they ever mention that you know of, that, of course, he's a rather large guy, and he was in very bad shape?
Mm-hmm.
Was that ever a possibility?
Well, he was on blood pressure medicine or whatever.
Blood pressure medicine? How many packs a day would he smoke?
Hard to say. Too
Could
many.
you guess?
I mean, I think he would maybe smoke 2 or 3 every time he would go down, which was at least once an hour.
So 2 or 3 cigarettes per smoke break
Right.
every hour.
Probably.
Okay. And that's a fact. I mean, you were with him for so many years, you
Right.
would know this.
Right.
And he would drink Mountain Dew constantly, yes?
Yes.
Right. So he was not in good shape.
No.
And he would just lay down at the office for hours sometimes.
Well, he would fall asleep in his chair sometimes, and then other times he would go and just not be able to hold his head up and would sleep on a sofa.
And he'd been at the office for hours by that time, right?
Usually.
Right? So that afternoon he would have a spell.
Right.
Hadn't been
Sometimes-
home.
Sometimes he would have the spells at home and not make it in.
Right. But those days that he was at the office, he hadn't been home. Melody hadn't stopped by and given him a special drink or anything like
Right.
that. He just had a spell.
Right.
Okay. That's all I have.
I have nothing further for this.
All right, let me step down. All right, y'all are doing outstanding at breaking right at lunchtime. All right. We'll take, let's try to get back up and running at 1:15.